Let's get you details of the extremely disturbing aspects that have emerged of the investigation into the crash of a passenger plane in March in China that killed over 130 people. According to sources, the flight data from the Boeing's black box indicated that someone in the cockpit actually intentionally crashed this plane. Investigators haven't received any evidence whatsoever of a technical malfunction so far. The black box flight recorders found amid the wreckage suggest deliberate input from the cockpit forced the Boeing 737 plane into a catastrophic nosedive. The pilots didn't respond to repeated calls from air traffic controllers and nearby planes during the rapid descent. That video of which you see on your screens, which went viral. The jet en route from Kunming to Guangzhou crashed on March 21st after a sudden plunge, a deathly plunge from a cruising altitude. 123 passengers, 9 crew members all died on board. It was termed as mainland China's deadliest aviation disaster in 28 years. Chinese investigators have led the crash inquiry. US officials, however, are also involved as the Boeing plane is made in the United States. But truly horrifying and disturbing, the fact that this could have been intentional. Let's take this across to Shiv Arora, our executive editor, who's joining us on this broadcast. It's disturbing to even process, Shiv, that nosedive from the high altitude right down to the ground that led to nearly 130 people dying was because of one person intentionally perhaps doing so.
We're absolutely right in calling this every passenger's worst nightmare, because what this basically means is the absolute worst combination of events ended and doomed this aircraft with over 100 people killed in China less than 2 months ago, Akshita. Remember, the world has been already grappling with the possibility that aircraft aren't, properly maintained. There are mechanical failures of all kinds that are dooming aircraft. The civil aviation industry is already in distress because of the pandemic. But here you've got a situation that it is a total nightmare. What the flight data recorder and the black box have basically indicated to experts analyzing it is that someone in the cockpit, they don't say the pilots because that they can't be sure of, but it's likely to have been one or both of the pilots who actually put this aircraft into that terrifying nosedive, which smashed it into a mountain, completely destroying it, in a fraction of a second, and in that scary video, CCTV video, which actually captured. Now, the reason why this is a nightmare is because someone had to intentionally do it. Remember, modern airplanes, Akshita, are designed for safety at all costs. The autopilot, the flight computer, etc. They don't allow pilots to actually make very, extreme maneuvers like steep climbs or, steep dives. It's not possible. The computer will not allow them to do such things because of inbuilt safety laws, in the flight computers. So for something like this to have happened, a trained pilot would have had to trip out the autopilot, disengage, any of the flight safety, computer programs within the cockpit. And I'm putting it very simplistically, but only a pilot would know how to do that, and then maneuver the aircraft into a steep dive of this kind out of the sky. Otherwise, it's not as simple as throwing the stick forward and putting the aircraft into a dive. The aircraft would simply not allow anyone to do that. So my sense is this would have had to be a pilot. Obviously, because experts analyzing this can't, pin blame directly on the pilots, because there is always the possibility that there may have been a hijacker, there may have been someone who forced himself or herself into the cockpit, someone who have been may have been trained themselves as a pilot. That is a theoretical possibility, but it looks very clearly like one of the pilots or both of the pilots disengaged the autopilot and put this aircraft into a steep dive as a suicidal flight. And that is what is really scary about this.
And I think that footage is all etched in our minds there, what we're playing out, Shiv. The fact that, you see the plane literally drop like a pin to the ground. And I think one question that everyone will have right now, that even I have right now is, what stops these kind of incidents from happening? You gave us a very elaborate process that's followed to ensure exactly this doesn't happen. Is there going to be a rethink on that if pilots can actually overcome it?
This is good. This is one of the human factors that there's going to be very little sort of defense against, Akshita, because you can You can do everything you can to manage the safety of aircraft. You can do everything you can to manage maintenance and make sure that passengers are safe, technically speaking. But how do how much can you do to ensure that, a pilot is not going to crash a plane? All kinds of vetting is done. Psychiatric, testings are done. Counseling is done. You remember the MH370 crash of the Malaysian Airlines in 2014. That is still a huge aviation mystery over whether this was a depressed pilot who crashed that entire plane, with no real indicators before the flight that he was distressed or upset in any way. Similarly, in this case as well, no red flags as such about these two pilots. They were two young pilots of China Eastern. No indicators of them being disturbed. But obviously now with this black box coming out and saying it was an intentional nosedive, sending that aircraft into an extreme speed dive into that mountain, there will be, more layers that will have to be uncovered. The investigation will have to go into great depths into the past of these pilots, what they were going through in their lives. And it is absolutely impossible for any system to keep tabs of pilots' lives all the time to see what may be on their minds, and especially something that may be on their minds that is extreme enough for them to actually do something like this. Remember, pilots are very well trained. It's a very noble profession. They take a lot of care of their passengers. They know that the lives of many people are in their hands. So this is, let's make it very clear, this is an absolute aberration, once it actually becomes part of an official report. But the very fact that even one such incident has come to light in 2022, when aircraft flying is supposed to be the safest in history, is truly, truly scary, because it adds that unknowable variable, doesn't it, Akshita, into every passenger's flight. How do I know? I can be sure that my aircraft is fine. I can be sure that this airline has done everything it can to make sure my plane is safe. But I do know for a fact that nobody can 100% guarantee me that my pilot is mentally 100% okay.
I think it also will play on everyone's minds. Very often we take flights, we move around without even thinking twice about it. And I think this kind of a story essentially puts the focus on how we're putting our lives in maybe one or two people's hands. And is it really safe is the question, because there is a lot of process, as you've mentioned. This is clearly an anomaly. It's not something that happens often at all. It happens extremely rarely, maybe one or two such incidents that we can highlight really of these kind of incidents of a suicidal essentially mission of a plane crash happening that's led to nearly 130 passengers dying. Let's bring in Paulami Saha also on this. She tracks very closely the civil aviation beat. Paulami, this kind of news that's coming in is something that everyone in the aviation industry is going to be tracking very closely to also see what the investigation puts out further on this, and then what kind of steps are taken to change and ensure that something like this can never happen again.
Absolutely. This is definitely extremely disturbing at many levels. This is something which is going to be thoroughly investigated. This is, of course, preliminary information that seems to be coming out, that certain media seem to have accessed via speaking to officials within the United States. Of course, the NTSB, which is in fact assisting the Chinese aviation authorities in their investigation, because the black boxes were brought to the United States, to Washington, after they were recovered. I still remember when we, in fact, covered this incident as it happened on March 15 earlier this year, and we covered it in a lengthy fashion. I went through all of the details. The black boxes were extremely tough to recover at that point of time. We do know that, it was very tough to, in fact, recover bodies of the passengers and the 9 crew members, the 132 passengers on board and the 9 crew members who lost their lives in this crash. It was extremely difficult because of the crash of the aircraft into the, mountains in Guangxi province of China. The black box is even more difficult, but it was after 2-3 days that they eventually found the black boxes that were then flown into Washington for forensic analysis. So after sort of examining that and trying to, of course, piece together events as they unfolded, because if you remember, at that point of time, experts did mention that the pilots who were on board the aircraft, in fact, did not respond to any of the commands as the aircraft was, in fact, descending from the air traffic control, from, in fact, aircraft other aircraft around it as well.
Yeah.
So what exactly happened in the cockpit is something which is going to be part of an extensive and a very lengthy investigation. And Chinese officials are already saying that it could take at least about 2 years for the final report to be out for us to know what happened inside that cockpit, because deliberate crashes per se, Akshata, are extremely, extremely rare.
That's right. And we're going to track every single update that comes in on this investigation. Extremely disturbing, worrying updates right now that are pouring in. No technical fault so far has been found in that plane that you see dropping there to the ground. Thanks, Shiv and Paulomi, for joining us this morning.